Thank you. Mr. Ochoa.
Yes, we have the much-deserved recognition of a great friend of Glendale. No, I don't mean Jess. I mean the man that he's going to introduce. Although Jess is good too. Don't get me wrong. But Jess will introduce Mr. Olivares.
Thank you, Mr. Ochoa, and thank you, Mayor Najarian and members of the City Council for the special recognition to honor what is, in my view, a very great a citizen of Glendale and a very good friend over the last 22 years that Mr. Olivares has served on the Community Development Block Grant Advisory Committee. So on behalf of the Community Service and Parks Department, which has responsibility to the committee, we want to join in recognizing Mr. Olivares and thanking him for his longstanding leadership, his diplomacy skills on the committee, which was very much needed, and the compassion that he shows for this community while serving on the committee, and also his commitment to this community as a member of the Community Development Block Grant Advisory Committee, which you know does not have an easy task in reviewing funding recommendations, and then on behalf of the City Council, sifting through those funding recommendations, spending tens of hours every year in conducting interviews and debating back and forth between the committee members and developing a funding recommendation plan and submitting that plan to the City Council. And more often than not, the City Council very much respects the work that the committee does and typically approves the recommendations as submitted to the City Council, and especially in light of there being such a big need in our community for services. So Mr. Olivares has been on this committee doing that type of work for over 22 years. That has to be some kind of a record for appointments to commissions. He has obviously had other opportunities to serve on other commissions, but has always indicated to us that his favorite and his passion had always been with the Community Development Block Grant Advisory Committee, and we will forever be indebted to Mr. Olivares and the stability that he has provided for that committee. And as a demonstration of how revered he is, we do have 4 of the 5 current advisory committee members here who want to give their own congratulations to Mr. Olivares, and they will be represented by Zanku Armenian, but we also have Armek Avdisian, Lila Ramirez, and we're expecting Ramela Markarian. I'm not sure if she made it in, but Chairman Zanku Armenian wants to make a very brief plaque presentation as well, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Jess, members of the City Council, Mr. Mayor. I first want to say what an honor it's been to serve, even in the short few years, with Mr. Olivares. He's provided a tremendous kind of transfer of command, if you will, by giving us newbies the training necessary to do the important work that the CDBG does. I've been grateful for his guidance, and I was looking up something meaningful to say. You know, I've never given a plaque to anyone for 22 years of service. In fact, I've never seen a plaque that says 1993 to 2015. But, you know, Nelson Mandela said, what counts in life is not the mere fact that we have lived. It is what difference we have made to the lives of others that will determine the significance of the life we lead. And I thought that really captured the service that Mr. Olivares has given to this community. And he's a great role model and example to our citizens of what a difference a single individual can make in our community with the thoughtfulness and kind of great meaning with which he has applied himself in the context of CDBG. It is a difficult task every year, but it is one that is tremendously fulfilling because you feel like you make a difference in the community, particularly for those parts of our citizens, those citizens in our community who are less fortunate than ourselves and need the helping hand that the city is able to provide, and that is a very fulfilling role. So if I could ask my other committee members to come up and Mr. Olivares to come up, we will make the presentation. Thank you. So So it says, City of Glendale recognizes Efrain Olivares with gratitude for your years of outstanding service to the CDBG Advisory Committee, 1993 to 2015. I hope this will be a different kind of plaque than
That's
others.
news to me. I put that home.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I really didn't want to do this. I'm not used to doing this. I didn't realize it was 22 years. But I do want to say when I first came to Glendale in the early 80s with my son who was 1 year old, I lived in southern Glendale, and that's where I kind of picked up on the needs of the community. And I want to say that I'm very glad that Glendale has taken a different path with CDBG than a lot of other cities do. Other cities will simply take the money and use it to build a housing project and do a single-purpose type of use. Here, we do it differently. We do take care of our nonprofits, and I know the committee that has been with me for a while is doing exactly that. So for that, I thank all of them, and I thank you all for your words. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Efren. Efren, don't go away. We have some comments from the dais. Mr. Sinania?
Yes. Hi, Efren.
How are you?
So I've had the pleasure of serving with you for 4 years on CDBG, and I remember those years and those times very fondly because you were an embodiment of the spirit of cooperation and really looking for solutions for some hard problems, because it always seems, now I know it's more so now than it was before, there was never enough money for those organizations in our great city that provide such an important service to our residents. So congratulations from the bottom of my heart.
Thank you.
Your contribution to the city of Glendale is undeniable, and you should be very proud.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Efren. We have a mayor's commendation for you, and it's in recognition of your exemplary leadership and dedication as a commissioner in the CDBG committee. We commend your hard work and participation in working with the committee members of the community and various organizations. 22 years. You just edged out Dave Weaver for longest service in a committee or board. But so you're I think you're the reigning champ, and your imprint and your ethics and your values have been imprinted on the city, and there are many thousands of people, children, adults, and seniors that appreciate your hard work. So I'm going to present this to you, and if someone else would like to speak.
I just want to say that during my years of volunteer work with the Commission and other nonprofits, coming before CDBG was always easier because you were there and we understood and could see your compassion and your knowledge of the nonprofits and the people in this community that needed those funds. So I thank you for that work that you did, and also for, I guess, the architectural contributions you've made to our city as well. So thank you, Efren, and congratulations.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, ditto. You have been an amazing public servant, a great contributor to the community, also very much involved in our Sister City program. And even though I haven't had the opportunity yet to go to our Sister City in Rosarita Beach, I still hope to do that. So whenever you're all ready, I'd love to go down. It's very, very appreciated. You've been great, and you've also, as Mr. Armenian said, you've been there for a long time to be able to bring people up to speed and to give that kind of institutional knowledge and background, and to be a great guide for people who are new to the committee. And I think the committee has done an amazing job over the years in a very difficult situation of shrinking revenues. And it's got to be our toughest committee to sit on at this point, because they want to give a lot of money to everybody and they can't. And it's hard to look people in the eye and cut their funding. And this committee does that, unfortunately. And I want to thank all of you for your work, because that's tough. That's a thankless position to be in, but very important. So congratulations. This is well deserved.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, I want to thank you and congratulate you as well for your commitment and dedication to our community. I got to know you, when was it, 2004, when I joined the Design Review Board, and it's been 11 years, and it was a pleasure working with you. And you beat Dave Weaver. I mean, that's something that not many people can say in this town. So congratulations, and thank you for your service as well.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next item, please.
Mr. Mayor, next item is actually a number of items that, if you'll allow, I'll read into the record together, but it is a public hearing, and item 2A is Director of Community Development regarding 2312 Blanchard Drive, Glendale Register nomination and Mills Act application. 2A is a resolution designating the residential property at 2312 Blanchard Drive on Glendale Register of Historic Resources and authorize a Mills Act contract between the owner and the city. 3A is a Director of Community Development regarding 1020 East Palmer Avenue, Glendale Register nomination. 3A is a resolution to list the former gas station structure at 1020 East Palmer Avenue on the Glendale Register of Historic Resources. 4A is Director of Community Development regarding 1330 Romulus Drive, Glendale Register nomination and Mills Act application. 4A is a resolution designating the residential property at 1330 Romulus Drive on the Glendale Register of Historic Resources and authorize a Mills Act contract between the owner and the city. And lastly, 5 is Director of Community Development regarding 232 through 234 South Grand Boulevard, known as the Masonic Temple Mills Act application. 5A is a resolution authorizing a Mills Act contract between the owner and the city. And these are all part of a public hearing.
Okay, Mr. Ochoa.
Yes, sir. While our senior urban planner, Jay Platt, comes forward, we do have, as the city clerk indicated, 4 of these items, and I think they're actually very interesting, both locally and regionally, as you'll hear from this first Tudor little cottage that we have. That was the home of the former heavyweight champion of the world. Pretty cool stuff. Willard. But with that, sorry to steal the thunder.
I've got
good
pictures
stuff.
to go with
There
it.
you go.
And I will open the public hearing.
Okay, and Jillian, will I be doing these all in a row, or will we take a vote between each one? Take a vote after? Okay. So the first item today, as Mr. Ochoa said, is 2312 Blanchard Drive. It's a Tudor Revival house in the Verdugo Woodlands neighborhood. It's got some very interesting architectural features. It's different than a lot of our other Tudor revivals. It's got kind of some storybook influences with this kind of funky entry tower with a little gable on it, and a very interesting roof that kind of rolls over the edges of the roof to look like kind of a thatched cottage is the goal they were going for. But in addition to its architectural significance, it was the home of Jess Willard, who retired to Glendale in 1936 and lived in the house for the next 12 years. Willard was a huge guy, 6'6". He was called the Potawatomi Giant when he started his career. But after Jack Johnson held the heavyweight title for 6 years, from 1909 to 1915, Willard became known as the Great White Hope for fairly ugly reasons, but it's definitely part of the history of his career and the history of boxing, and then part of our history now. So the house was determined by the Historic Preservation Commission to be significant under Criterion 3 for its architecture and also under Criterion 2 for its association with Jess Willard. And it's kind of interesting to note that we've got a lot of sports people. We have Ed Strangler Lewis on Royal Boulevard. We have Casey Stengel on Grandview. We have a few others that I know of that haven't been nominated yet. But for some reason, Glendale was attractive to sports figures even either during their career or when they retired. So this continues that tradition if you choose to designate it. That's all I've got.
Okay.
I'll move the
Discussion?
item. Oh, we're still in the public hearing?
No, I mean, if there's any discussion. We have a motion and a second. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Devine.
Yes.
Friedman.
Actually, can I ask a quick question, though? Sorry. I'm going to vote yes, but my question is, this roof is like a shingle roof?
Mm-hmm.
At some point, maybe you can tell me offline, with the wood, sort of the historic wood roofs that aren't allowed anymore, do we make people recreate them in a different material, or do we allow them to exist?
Yeah, the commission actually talked about this. This is kind of a fanciful version, and this I didn't include detail photos.
Yeah.
This has a lot of very intricate detail that isn't historic. It's what the current roofer chose to put up there, and it looks great, so we're not going to make them change the roof. If they ever needed to in the future, the recommendation would be to keep the kind of sense of the rolled eaves, but not necessarily have as much color and detail as is up there, so it looks a little more like the traditional roof.
So I guess the question was really if when people have historic roofs that are in materials that aren't permanent anymore,
Oh, sure,
or
yeah.
that aren't allowable anymore because of fire codes, that kind of thing, do we just make them try to?
Yeah, we try to get it as
match?
close as possible that still meets
Okay,
code.
that's all. So yeah, my vote is yes.
Are you sure?
Were we in the middle of
I
the
just I was going to ask the question and I just didn't have the time.
Yes. Oh, you didn't call my name yet. Go ahead. I'm
Let's go
getting
over it
ahead
one-
of myself.
Let's start from
Let's start from the beginning. Councilmember Devine,
Yes.
Friedman,
Yes.
Garbettian,
Yes.
Sinanian,
yes.
Mayor Najarian.
Yes.
Oh, I forgot to show this picture of Jess Willard in front of the house. So he's the old guy. Show up second from the right. Okay, this is a building that I imagine everyone in the room and hopefully on the dais is familiar with. It's our former Richfield oil gas station in Adams Square. It's the centerpiece of the Adams Square mini park. And this is part of our ongoing effort to have city-owned buildings that are worthy of designation be brought before council to determine whether or not they could be designated, because we think it's important from the Historic Preservation Commission and staff that the city honor its city-owned buildings as well as when we have private owners come to us with their properties. So everyone was very happy with this restoration. It was truly a community effort. Here you see it in its dilapidated state. It really rallied the Adams Hill community, Adams Square community, to try to find a solution for this. And when the city proposed building a park there, it seemed like the obvious choice was to put it in the center of the park. So this is really a great example of community-based preservation. The Historic Preservation Commission recommends designation. It was found eligible under the architecture criterion as well as the early heritage of the city criterion as one of our few early examples of gas station architecture, and something that's definitely worthy of being protected.
Jay, have we looked at the gas station in Kenneth Village?
I have. It's very similar to this, actually.
But it's something that, do we have it listed as potentially eligible?
It's on our kind of a watch list. We've worked with the owners over the years to, when the property was up for sale, we told them it had a potential historic resource on the site. And if someone wanted to designate it, it's likely to be eligible.
Because it's changed hands a number of times, and I just worry about some of the alterations that people might do. So when we let people know when they buy it or when companies want to move in what they can and can't do.
Yeah, I'll make sure there's a hold on the property, but we've definitely been watching it. So.
I'll move the item.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Councilmember Devine,
Yes.
Friedman,
Yes.
Garbettian,
Yes.
Sinanian,
Yes.
Mayor Najarian.
Yes.
Our third item is up the hill from the gas station on Romulus Drive in Adams Hill. And this is a very interesting mid-century building in the modern style. A privately owned residence, obviously. And the first time I drove by it, I was very struck by it. It's got a lot of kind of curb appeal, if this is your kind of thing. But the owner came to us and asked to have it nominated. The commission looked at it and felt that it was a significant example of the modern style, which we have a number of examples of in Glendale, but it's certainly not the dominant style that you see in other parts of the Los Angeles area. It was designed by David Axelman, who's an architect we don't know too much about, but he was a USC graduate in the 50s, definitely part of the USC School of Architecture, not the school, but the work that came out of the school. And we have several other examples of that style on the register, but nothing by David Axelman. So the commission felt that this was eligible under Criterion 3 for its architecture.
Yes, Mr. Van.
This one has like 5 contingencies. How does this work? Will they receive this Mills Act before they do the modifications, or will someone? How is this enforced?
You know, we found over the years that by adding conditions to the Mills Act, it allows the Mills Act to remain an incentive for people to come and designate their properties, but gives the commission and the council the ability to remedy any kind of problems that the site might have. This house, for example, above the carport on the left, the beam is sagging dramatically there. The owner volunteered to do that. The commission didn't even have to ask, but we added that to the conditions, and then we give them a reasonable time frame to fulfill the conditions. during their ownership while they're receiving the benefits of the Mills Act. So in theory, some of that money that they're saving on property taxes goes back into the property.
Do they have a certain amount of time when they have to have this done?
Yeah, I'm just checking now. I can't
I don't know
remember.
if
I
it's
think
in-
we gave them 2 years for this project. I did not write it into the staff report. I think it was 2 years.
2 years?
Yeah, depending on the extent of the change or the work that needs to be done, we'll either give a year. In some cases, we've given 3 or more years if it's a lot of work.
And how do we know that they're doing it? I mean, do
We
you,
monitor it every
monitor?
year. Every January, we give a
Okay.
report to HPC with the Mills Act condition fulfillments of the previous year.
okay,
And so we're staying on top of that.
okay, great, thank you.
Mr. Karpetian?
Yes, it's eligible under criterion 3, right?
Right.
How many do we have? 4?
Oh, we have
Criteria?
5 now.
5, right. Okay, and if you fall under 1, you just need 1 to be eligible.
Exactly.
Okay, thank you. That's all I want.
And what is criterion 3?
It's for its architecture.
Design.
The quality of its design, the work of the architect. There are a few kind of subheadings under it, but we found this to be an outstanding example of its style.
Okay. I mean, you were honest. You said this is your thing, so
Oh, I know,
yeah.
but
Yeah,
it's a, you know, looking at houses like this from the street doesn't necessarily give them their full justice, and I streamlined the slideshows for council, but it has a very beautiful indoor-outdoor flow. There's a patio up on the hillside behind the house. All of the rooms open onto that patio. There's a beautiful stairway rising up from the front door. We don't designate the interiors or regulate how they're used, but when you look at the house as it was designed, this house is in very original condition, very high integrity, and then also has a lot of interesting architectural features.
For the future presentations, please bring more pictures so we can visualize a little
I'm
better.
told not to, but
Yes.
I'll
Is-
do
Yeah,
my
I
best to
understand.
find
Today is a-
find a balance. Yeah.
I have
Today's a
another,
tough day, so.
I have another, is this in a historic district by any chance?
No,
No,
no.
no, okay. I'm just wondering, I had a question about extending the Mills Act to contributor homes in the, and I wondered where that is at this point.
As a matter of fact, that will come to you tonight, the email.
Oh, the email.
Right, just it's a general update for council, and if you want to agendize, we would bring back.
Great,
Just to
okay.
make
On
executive-
Mills Act
On
issues?
the extension of Mills Acts to contributor homes versus homes that are on the historic register, particularly homes in historic districts
Districts.
that are contributors.
That are contributors.
Not the historic properties, but the contributors.
I understand. And if you could maybe follow that up, I'd like to know how many Mills Act homes we have.
Currently, we have 72 scattered across 6, soon to be 7 districts with a tax savings of about $8,000 per parcel that results in a revenue loss to the city of an average of about $1,000 per parcel.
So about $72,000.
About $75,000, $79,000
That's the total loss from all the Mills Act buildings that we
to
have.
the city, not to all taxing
City,
entities
to
like
the
the school
city. So
district.
whatever,
Right.
whatever the measly
We get 13
13%
cents on the
that we
dollar,
get.
13.7. So.
And is 72 out of 40,000, well, how many homes actually?
35,000.
About 40,000 parcels.
Is that a significant figure compared to other cities, or are we about equal? or-
Over 1% of New York City is designated, so that's a much higher number. I'd say we're less certainly than, well, Los Angeles has 880,000 parcels. How many?
Even in tiny Monrovia,
We don't
it had
know.
eclipsed well over 100 local landmarks, not all of which had Mills Act, but many of them did. So Glendale's efforts are newer. Certainly, we've worked feverishly. We do about 5 to 8 Mills Act contracts per year. So you do the math, you can see that we've ventured into this arena fairly recently. So we'll give you all of that information, and the council can decide whether or not you want to agendize it, and we'll bring it back for your discussion.
Okay, thank you. And was there a motion on this?
I'll move the item.
Second?
Roll call, please.
Council members Devine?
Yes.
Friedman?
Yes.
Karpetian?
Yes.
Sinanian?
Yes.
Mayor Najarian?
Yes.
Okay, our final item is a Mills Act application for the Masonic Temple on Brand Boulevard. This is actually different than anything that we've dealt with before because this building has been designated since 1997. It's one of the first buildings to be on the Glendale Register, but for whatever reason, the previous owners never nominated it for a Mills Act. The current owners who have been going through a major rehabilitation and restoration of the building, which hopefully you've all been watching as it's been revealed as the scaffolding came down, have put a tremendous amount of work into the property and are now asking for the Mills Act application, which was recommended to Council by the Historic Preservation Commission with several conditions I'll get to in a minute. But I wanted to just show you recent photos. These aren't the most up-to-date photos, but these are the photos the Commission just saw in their recommendation. When we look at the front of the building, we consider almost all of this work a restoration. All of the original windows on the front at the upper levels are in place and have been restored. There's restorative work being done in the large arch to bring back front doors that look like the original front doors. We have good photos of the early years of the building. And then 2 new storefronts will be installed, which aren't exact restorations of what was there, because we don't know exactly what was there, but they're good period storefronts that will fit the context of the building and its overall historic appearance.
Jay, as you talk about these elements, including the storefronts, can you address the Glendale Historic Society's concerns about, for instance, they mentioned the storefronts and about, I believe, I mean, I just got this letter a few minutes ago, so I've been trying to read it, but I thought that they were talking about the storefronts as being not appropriate, and certainly the windows. So
the windows I can definitely address. I don't remember the storefronts. We do know that the original storefronts had deeply recessed entry doors.
I think that, you know what, where I got confused, it said the new windows are standard storefront exclusion, so I think I got
they're talking about
so
the
they
large
weren't
windows.
talking about the storefronts then. But
No, they may have had some concerns, but I don't think it came out in the letter. What they have been concerned about are the windows on the side and rear facades. In this image, you can see the stair tower that's being built up on the side of the building. This was approved by the Historic Preservation Commission, and Caruso Affiliated hired a historic resource consultant, Page and Turnbull, to kind of review all of this work as it was moving forward on a pretty accelerated schedule. So between Page and Turnbull staff and the Historic Preservation Commission, I'm very comfortable that all of this work meets the Secretary of the Interior standards for rehabilitation. And it's important to note the word rehabilitation because there are 4 sets of standards that the federal government has. The rehabilitation standards are designed for projects like this, where there's significant work that needs to be made to make the building useful again, to bring it back to life. And as everyone knows, this building was pretty dead for a very long time. And the upper floors were practically unusable because there were these large windowless rooms that made sense for the Masons and the ceremonies that they had there. But the Masons hadn't been in the building since the 1930s, and those rooms didn't really have anything that anyone could find to make them valuable as rental space. So the process here was basically finding a way to bring life to these upper floors. So here's a better shot of some of the windows. The top floor is actually a double height space with a new mezzanine ringing the perimeter of the room. It's really an amazing space if you haven't been up there. And so those windows are larger than the other windows to kind of reflect the double height of that area. And then we have other windows on the lower floors that are larger than the historic windows, but were found necessary by the developer to bring enough light and enough rental value to these spaces to make the project worthwhile. We should also note that on the side facades as well as at the front, a number of historic window openings were retained. They're more on the north facade than the south, but at the top, above the stair tower, you can see 2 of the historic steel windows that were retained. And then also, just above the blue tarp, there are 3 windows, I think, that are the historic windows being retained.
those historic windows, sort of the shadows to the right?
No, I was just gonna hit those. For seismic upgrade reasons, they need to do some infill of some of the windows to create shear panels in the wall system. So when you see those shadows, those are old window openings, but instead of having them filled to be flush with the surface of the wall, we ask that they be recessed a couple of inches and have a different texture than the wall. And the idea of that is to create these kind of ghost outlines of the windows so that, the average person passing by will look at that and say, oh, it looks like some windows got filled in. So we recognize that there were significant changes made to the appearance of the building to the greatest extent possible between the consultant staff and the owners. We tried to make sure that these were recognizable as changes, which meets the Secretary of the Interior standards, which calls for new work being different from the existing work. One of the Historical Society's biggest concerns is the quality of these large windows. And in particular, they were concerned that the muntins, which are the little dividing lines between the panes of glass, they were concerned that those were applied to the exterior of the glass rather than being true through window pieces where the glass was inserted between these mullions. From the beginning, we didn't expect these to be what's called true divided light. We knew these would be simulated divided lights. Unfortunately, at some point in the construction process, one of those muntins got knocked off, and it made it very obvious that this wasn't an ideal situation in terms of them coming off. But that was because something hit it. They don't just fall off routinely. Page and Turnbull has done research, and they're available if you have any specific questions about this. They've done research into other National Register properties and general federal standards, and these, what's called a simulated divided light, have been used in many historic buildings in the past. The same is true of exterior stair towers, elevator shafts, that sort of thing. And these are all part of large rehabilitation projects in many cases. So though we recognize that these windows are different and they may not be exactly what the Historical Society was expecting, we never expected them to look like the old historic windows. In fact, we wanted them to look somewhat different, but to have some proportions that actually reflected the small panes of the earlier windows. You can see it a little better on the north facade. Whoops.
And why not require the true divided lights?
Because of the size of the windows, the framing elements would have had to get so big that we would have lost. They would look less like the historic windows than these do, because they would have had to be structural to hold relatively large and heavy pieces of glass.
Why require the divided lights at all then?
Because it provides a sense of texture on the facade, so it kind of provides, as your eye kind of passes over the wall, it kind of links the old windows and the new windows. But I don't think anyone looking, let's look at the north facade where all of the windows on the right bay are the original windows. In this photo, it's a little hard. You can sort of see some of the divisions of the individual panes. And the goal was there's a larger center panel inside each of these windows, which is about the same size as those older openings. And then the perimeter around it has the smaller divisions, which recall the kind of muntins of those old windows. So we looked at it as kind of a way to strike a balance between old and new, while clearly letting this read as this is a new intervention, and we're not trying to hide it.
Are these the kind of windows on the right that were covered up on the other side?
Yeah, those would be the windows that are, and there are some of the ghost windows on the left, and a few on the right also. You can't really see them in the lighting on this one. So this photo shows to the right the ghost images pretty well.
So, may I, Mr. Mayor?
Yes, please.
Thank you.
Mr. Sinai.
So you clearly don't agree, staff doesn't agree with the Historical Society's conclusion that the alterations are so significant that it no longer qualifies?
No, and they make some arguments where they say no homeowner would be allowed to do something like this, and I agree, no homeowner would be allowed to do something like this. Single-family houses were built as single-family houses, and they stay houses. They're not changing use. They're not going through a radical transformation from very specific club function to standard modern office space.
But would the similar standard be applied to a homeowner where I completely agree that the building as it used to be was virtually useless. Mm-hmm. It practically couldn't be used for almost any purpose, and that must have been one of the reasons why it sat vacant for so long. Something had to be done.
Right.
But would that same kind of analysis and standard be applied to a homeowner for whom, if they bought a home, but it no longer sort of made sense in modern living conditions for that home to exist in that condition, and it had to be changed? Would you apply the same standard to them? I think that's a very important question, by the way.
The same standards for rehabilitation apply to single-family houses in Glendale. We'd look at it differently. If there were major changes that needed to be made, we might move them to the non-visible portions of the facade. Okay. There are very few. I can't think of many examples. If you had a colonial revival-style house, which has a certain kind of window opening and spacing, and someone said, hey, I want to turn one of those windows into a sliding glass door on the front of my house so I can walk out on the front lawn, that's the kind of thing we probably wouldn't be able to approve. We would take it to the Historic Preservation Commission, of course, if staff couldn't approve it, so that it could be heard in a public hearing. But there are different types of buildings require kind of a different level of analysis, I guess.
Which is good. Flexibility is good. So I just want to make sure we're not dogmatic with homeowners versus business owners and small guys and big guys.
No, I was
Fair to
specifically
everyone.
thinking of the Historical Society's point, and that's something we definitely don't agree with. So.
Okay. And did the Historical Society participate in the commission process? I mean, did they?
They
come in with
testified
that?
at the hearing.
Okay, so they did bring up.
Yeah,
their-
the Historic Preservation Commission received a letter. I can't say it's exactly the same letter, but it's definitely similar.
Okay. Well, I wish they would, because in the past they've they've made their presence physically. They've come in with a large group and they've argued against other buildings, whether it was they were going to be demolished for development purposes or otherwise. I'm kind of surprised that they're not here as a group to argue against it. But that may be a function of how they feel about the strength of their argument.
No, and I think they recognize that it's great that we're bringing this building back. I think everyone agrees about that.
Good. So my second question is, do we know, and this is to Mr. Ochoa or someone who's done the math, so what's the city's loss in potential tax revenues from Mills acting this?
At this point, I could not tell you because the way that we calculate, I would be estimating at this point.
Because you don't know what the property's worth?
The way that we do Mills Act, it's a function not of the market value, but of the rents and the income approach. And so it varies from property to property. I would have to probably see what the ultimately what the leases with CBRE. We will get that to you, but I don't know that resident.
Because I anticipate this issue coming up. I mean, people are going to be saying, well, 71 properties or whatever result in nearly $75,000 of loss in tax revenue to the city of Glendale, and one property results in X amount. And if it's $100, obviously it's not a very attractive point to latch onto. If it's thousands, it's different. If it's tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, a very different story. So I just want to. I mean, we got to be.
It won't be insubstantial because it's going towards the rehabilitation of the property. So it will be, but if.
So what do we mean? When you say
it won't be just a couple of $100. It'll be a number of thousands.
Or $5,000.
Right.
$4,000 or $5,000.
Yeah, it will be thousands of dollars.
But
several
not-
$1,000s, not several $100s.
But not tens of thousands of dollars.
I don't think so, but we'll have to look.
We only have one comparable, not even comparable, but we have one example, the Central Storage Building on Central, just south.
Sure.
Or Central, south of Colorado. And what's interesting about that, and we don't do the calculations for our applicants because I don't know how to do it, and we rely on the county assessor to do that. We do tell people if they're concerned to have their tax accountant look into it, but we don't want to be responsible for promising any amount that likely could be different than what we say. But the Central Storage Building percentage reduction was smaller than the typical percentage reduction for our single-family properties. It was in the 30s, where a lot of the single families go 50s, 60s, even into the 70s. So proportionally, it could be a smaller reduction, but it's still going to be substantial.
I mean, a building that is worth $10 million assessed pays $100,000 a year in taxes. Our return is 13%.
13.7 cents on the 1%.
I'm not saying that's worth $10 million, but
So it may be in the tens of thousands, maybe 20,000. So.
It's going to be a function of what the calculation is, and ultimately it's between the landlord and their accountant and the county and ultimately even the IRS, I'm sure.
They don't get, as Jay was indicating, they don't get the entire thing deducted. They
Right,
get
you get a portion.
50%, 30%, or 60%. So for the storage, it was 30%. So if their taxes are $100,000, they get $30,000 in tax benefit. Am I correct?
Yes, but it's a
then
function
we
of
get
what-
13% off that
of that.
$30,000, which is $5,000. Yeah, I was right. Again. See, 5,200.
you're always right.
Yeah.
You'll use an income approach as opposed to a
Right.
market approach.
Right.
I have a question for Jay before we take our speaker. I didn't realize, and I've toured the building, and it's a wonderful building, but I didn't realize the windows on the south facade and north facade are incongruous.
Because there's three double height spaces on the south side. And one is the upper level, which shares the north and the south side. And then there were two ceremonial rooms that were pushed to the north. And there was this amazing truss that was built through the building to suspend some of those. So structurally, it was pretty interesting work for the time. But it reflects the interior spaces.
It's like the mezzanine.
Okay. I have a card from Chris Cragnati.
Good afternoon, everyone. Chris Craignati. I'm a resident of Glendale. Thank you for having me. I just wanted to speak in support of granting the Mills Act for this property. The last time I was in the Masonic Temple, I was knee-high to a pig's eye. I think I was there to see a movie, and it was not the most beautiful place in Glendale at the time. And so to see it kind of now rejuvenated and brought back to life at great expense. I happened to be at the HPC meeting a couple of weeks ago when this was brought before them. I was there for another matter, and was able to listen to the detail that they and the expense that they went to make all of this happen and to make it functional and to keep it, in keeping as best they could with the theme and the style of this building, which is a fairly unique building, not a lot to compare it to. So I just want to let you all know as a resident that I think it's a really great adaptation that they've done, and I hope that you'll support the Mills Act for them. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Mr.
There was
Platt.
actually, I wanted to share with you the conditions that were applied to the property.
Yeah.
Yes, share that.
On those. Between staff and the commission, we're recommending 4 conditions. And again, this is kind of an unusual project because you're being asked to vote on it before the work is actually complete, as was HPC. And we recognize that that's...
Why is that?
Because of the schedule for the work and also the applicant's desire to move this forward. Mills Acts are done only once a year, right. So we send them to the assessor every December.
So we couldn't wait until the work was done and then apply for it?
That's what I believe to be true. You can check. But what we've done to make sure that we don't run into any problems, we added a condition that after completion of work, staff is going to tour the site, review all of the work, make sure that it conforms to the approved drawings as well as to the Secretary of the Interior standards. If we find any deviance from those, we're going to say we need to work on this and fix it. Our recourse, which I don't think would ever be the case, but if the owner said, no, we don't agree, we're not going to fix that, the Mills Act contract could be canceled, which has a very stiff financial penalty associated with it, so I assume that's prohibitive, and we'll make sure all of the work is done as approved. The applicant, with their historic consultant, also prepared a maintenance plan, which the commission has asked that we attach to the contract and make it in effect in perpetuity for all owners, including the current owners. So that will be recorded with the county. We are also going to ask the owner to submit an annual maintenance plan, which basically goes down each item. Annual maintenance report, which looks at each item of the plan, tells us what they did, what they didn't do. That means that when I'm not here, when you're not here, when none of us are here, but we have staff still reviewing this maintenance plan, that we'll have an ongoing record of everything that's been done and everything that needs to be done on their schedule. And then finally, because this was designated in 1997, we've never had good photo documentation of the entire property. So we're asking that the baseline documentation, the photos that they submitted with this application, be updated after the work is done so that we have a full set from scratch, basically showing us where things started once the contract was in effect.
So when it was registered or nominated, 1995 or 97, you said?
97.
Okay. There was no photos taken to
it's too bad it happened this way. It was in the preservation element in 1977. So we started protecting our buildings before we even had a Glendale register. When we had the register, 37 of the first properties from the element were just transferred automatically into the register. We don't have applications. We don't have owner signatures. It's an unusual situation, but the city did it at that time, and that's where we are today.
So this is registered already, and they didn't apply for Mills Act before. Now they're applying for the Mills Act.
Exactly.
And it was registered under what criterion? What eligible under what criterion? The design.
I'd have to go back. We actually did have that. I assume it was for the design. It's possible it would have been for the association with the Masons also.
So if they wanted to register this today and it didn't fall because of all the discrepancies under the design, it could have been registered under the fact that it was a temple for Masons and.
Yeah, if it hadn't been designated, you mean?
Right.
Yeah, no, I think this building defines landmark. It's like one of our most.
So one way or the other, it would have been registered, and the Mills Act would have applied to it.
Sure. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, usually we do them concurrently, so this is unusual, but there's no reason, nothing in the code that tells us we can't do it this way.
Got it.
So, Jay, I have a question. So explain to me the Secretary of the Interior's desire for historic buildings, for adaptive reuse, for differentiating old from new construction. In other words, are you supposed to try to make your new construction look like it's the historic construction, or are you supposed to make it look different?
You want it to look different. What we're trying to avoid is creating what everyone calls a false sense of history. We want new work to look like new work, we want old work to look old, and we find ways to make them compatible, which in our estimation, we found that way on this project.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Ochoa? Oh,
You have
I
someone-
see. We're running short on time.
Oh, okay. I just wanted to say that it seems like they've gone to great lengths to maintain the integrity of this building. This annual maintenance report is going to go on forever, so that they don't. Is this an attempt to make sure that nothing else has changed in the future?
We would
Right.
hate to see the building in the previous condition sitting on Brand Boulevard as an eyesore for however long. So,
Okay.
yeah, it's on a regular schedule. So.
I move the item, Mr. Mayor, if
Second.
there's no other.
I'll
Is there a second?
Well, I said I wanted to make comments.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Oh, you wanted to make comments? I'm sorry. Sorry.
Just a few. That's all right. No, just a few. I just wanted to say, as someone who's worked in historic preservation as an advocate for a long time, this has been a building that's been a major concern for people in Glendale and outside of Glendale, given that it is a landmark. It's in a very prominent location. It's a very large building, but it's one of those rare buildings in a city that really defines a sense of place and a sense of history for a community. So it's certainly a building that's attracted a lot of attention over the years. And so I appreciate that the Glendale Historic Society is taking a particular interest in this building. I think that's their role, and they are good stewards of these resources, and that's their attempt. Now, I really can't comment about the quality of the window of the divided lights because it's not my area of expertise. I have to trust staff when, our historic preservation staffer, when he says that he believes that this was appropriate, and a little bit of maybe differing memory of the Historic Society thinking that that's not what was approved, but you're saying that is what went in front of HPC for approval. And that's what they approved, and it wasn't appealed to us, and we put the faith in them. But I want to say that I really like the way that the new windows do what you said in terms of reflecting back to the historic elements of the building while not trying to pretend to be historic windows. That's very appropriate, and it gives the building, you can really, when you look at the sides of the building, and it's even more evident in the photos, you kind of see old and then you see new, and it signals that pretty clearly, which is appropriate. But seeing this building renovated is really, really exciting. I mean, I've been living in this community for 20 years now, and actually, almost 20 years, and this building has been really an eyesore, and a building that, you worried sometimes walking past it about something falling off the building and hitting you. And it was dissolving and from just neglect. And we were losing a resource every single day, every time it rained and every time the wind blew. And I've been able to go inside of it during this renovation, and the inside is really spectacular, and they're doing something really incredible. And to give Mills Act relief for a property like this, to allow them to do this sort of grand-scale renovation, is what the Mills Act is all about. And unlike a home that's going to go from a home from one owner to a home from another, or a home that from the 1910 to 1950 to 2000, this is a building that's going through it, like you said, a whole new use. It's going from something that doesn't exist anymore, which is being a Mason's temple. Maybe there are some out there, but no one's really out there creating them and doing them large. I mean, they didn't want to move back in, let's say. So we had to come up with something different. And having a whole new use of being an office building that requires light and requires air and requires something very different is what adaptive reuse is about. Taking an old resource and finding a new use for it is what we're always looking for in the historic preservation community. What will we do with it now that it's not going to be the bowling alley or it's not going to be the sanitarium? What's the next life for this building? And this building has done that. And I think it's exciting, and I think that once it's occupied and people have moved in and the lights are on at night, it's going to regain that landmark status. So I want to thank the owners of the building for taking it on, and the old owners for letting it go. And the community for being interested in the Glendale Historic Society for being the great advocates for this property and all of the others that they are. So you have a motion in your second now, or should I second? Or make the
I have it.
motion?
Time for a second.
Second.
Time for closing the public hearing, and roll call, please.
Councilmember Devine.
Yes.
Friedman.
Yes.
Garpetian.
Yes.
Sinanian.
Yes.
Mayor Najarian.
Yes.
I have one comment, Mr. Mayor.
Yes,
if I may.
Mr. Carpet.
For future properties that it's coming up to vote, when I was on the HBC, we had the opportunity to go see the properties. I mean, if that's available to us, I would personally like to go see them because I like to see what I'm voting on. One picture or two pictures, it's okay, but seeing it is believing it. I think that would be I would appreciate that opportunity. I mean, not all of us have to go, but I like to go see the properties before we vote on it.
Okay, we have no further business. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved. Second.
Second, we're adjourned.